Good afternoon and welcome. This is Costume Weathering 101 or 201 or whatever university-like designation you want to give to it. I am Chris Talbott with the 501st Legion and Rebel Legion. And apparently I am the guy who was silly enough to sign up for all of these panels. So what we'll talk about today will be more of costume weathering. We talked a little bit about hard part weathering or prop weathering in yesterday's panels, yesterday's panel on the topic, and so we talked a little bit about using wash and dry brush techniques to enhance the look of items that are more solid, made out of plastic or metal or things like that. Today we'll be talking about things that are a little more soft parts, as it were. Things like leather, things like fabric. So we will start with kind of the continuation of our Jawa experience for the weekend by talking about weathering a leather bandolier. So one of the things I like to do with especially like a bandolier or other sorts of soft parts that are supposed to be in a sandy environment, is I'll create a wash out of wood glue, and I think probably I haven't pierced the top on that, so I'll just go ahead and pour a dollop in. Doesn't take a lot, and that's for its adhesive properties mostly. And then I will add a little bit of this is called desert sand, oddly enough, and actually I'm showing you a camera you can't see because the QR code is up. I'll put the QR code up again later if you wanted a chance to get to it and didn't get a chance so far. So desert sand is the color I'm going to be using here. And
wood glue work better for this than other types?
Wood glue is what I happen to have in my shop. You could use white glue. You could use, I would not use anything like a super glue or even like an E6000. I would use something that is more like an Elmer's product. So wood glue, white glue. I wouldn't necessarily even use like the blue school glue because I think the blue is going to give you too much color. The nice thing about wood glue is it's already kind of a beige color, and white glue, of course, is white. So it's kind of got that right in the name.
About how much water did you start with?
I started with about I'll say maybe an ounce and a half, okay, something like that. It's more. I've never taken the measurements, and that's on me. That's a terrible habit of mine to not really measure things. I just do them until they look right to me. And so in this case, what we're looking for is a very, very dilute mixture. It should look an awful lot like water, maybe closer to skim milk, maybe somewhere in that consistency. Not as delicious as whole milk, but also maybe slightly better for you. But again, not even as thick as whole milk. So what you're basically after is something that's going to feed through an airbrush or a spray bottle fairly readily, because the trick on this is to get a nice light coat before you then throw your sand at things. So I'm going to go ahead and let this just kind of set for a minute. It's not really required, but I realized that I had skipped some of the preliminary steps on this. So with leather, and when you start with a Jawa or even a Tuscan Raider or anything that uses these sort of 1903 Belgian bandoliers, a lot of times, and this actually has been kind of pre-weathered to some degree, you'll end up with very shiny, very smooth leather, probably very dark brown, very new looking in that case. And so what I like to do is I'll take like an 80 grit sandpaper and I'll just kind of start scuffing the edges of things, especially where things might rub. And if you're part of my panel from yesterday, that was another theme. There's the key to me in weathering an item is figuring out where things are going to rub and knocking them down, or giving them a little extra attention as far as maybe making the surface look a little worse for wear. So the bottom of these particular ammo pouches, I think, would tend to rub against things because they're an exposed corner, they're an exposed surface. So I wouldn't expect any of these corners to really have any of, or much of any of their original finish left on a particularly well-used bandolier. And again, anything that looks like a corner here on these flaps, I would definitely hit a little bit with sanding to kind of, again, give you that it's been carried and scratched and scraped, and you know, not that Jawas don't take care of their stuff, but you know, they tend to hand these things down from generation to generation, become family heirlooms. And so Uncle Utini gave it to cousin Utini, who gave it to second cousin Utini, who then got it by marriage to Princess Utini, and whatnot and so forth. So, yeah, it's a thing. So, all right, so that kind of gives you the idea, you know, that even in addition to the scuffing that was already there, I've added some more, you know, kind of knock down some of that leather. And then what we'll do is we'll take our glue and this is going to cause me a bit of work later on, because I ordinarily don't use my good airbrush for this. I will use like a canned air version airbrush that you can get at a hobby store for, you know, 20, 30 bucks. And mostly because those are a little easier to deal with as far as the cleaning and whatnot. But in this case, we go to war with what we have, and so what we have is this. And I will clean it later, and it'll all be fine, and I'll only have myself to blame anyway. So, all right, so we'll move these out of the way. Thank you, sweetheart. And we'll go ahead, just so they don't get all covered in schmutz. All right, so then basically the act I do here is, I'll essentially kind of spray the mixture all over the bandolier, getting especially corners, especially crannies, things like that. Little attention on the top. And then once I've got it nice and kind of coated, what I'll do is, yeah, I got it. Thank you. And then we'll take the sand, which again you can get at a craft store, a hobby store, what have you. And this just happens to be just kind of garden variety sand. You know, not particularly high quality, not particularly clean looking, but then just kind of dump it over. You know, especially again trying to hit those crannies you hit with the glue mixture, and along the top and the sides there. And you're going to have more sand than you're going to want initially. We'll come back after we talk about some other things and do the rest of this, but for now, this is the part we started with, which is again applying the kind of the glue mixture. And the thing about both the glue and the paint is that the paint part will still stick even after I've removed some of the sand, and so it'll kind of knock down the shine of the leather. So, all right, so moving on, we'll talk a little bit more about using some dry brush techniques. You'll notice I'm fond of this hat, but it's also very much Rebel Pilot orange, traffic cone pilot if you want to think about it that way. And so I didn't want to mess up the one I just bought, so I bought another one I could show you guys with, because I will be honest with you, I didn't know I was doing this panel until I got here this weekend for the weekend. So I knew I had the bandolier with me, and I knew I had these gloves with me to talk about a little bit, but I didn't really have anything that kind of said the actual jumpsuit or the actual textile. So how I would approach, like, say, an X-Wing jumpsuit, I'd want to, like on the edges, again, where we're talking about things that kind of maybe hit things, I would want to scuff things up just a little bit, rough them up, make them look a little worn out. And again, for the orange pilot jumpsuit, the weathering isn't usually as noticeable. They look actually kind of incongruously new in the movies. It's almost like they got a new crate of jumpsuits and handed them out to the pilots right before the run at Yavin. But you can see as I'm kind of going along, the formerly crisp edge looking a little fuzzy, looking a little furry. Yes, sir.
What is there a particular grit of sand?
This particular sandpaper is 80 grit. I tend to use a coarse grit. You could use a finer grit if you wanted to get a little more, but this also produces nice scratches in hard surfaces that you can then fill with a dark wash. So, and that's, so it's kind of my go-to when I reach for something I'm going to try and weather something with. It kind of comes down to a personal preference. You could use a coarser grit, you could use a finer grit, but so in this case, I've gone ahead and roughed up my surface, and then I will take some of my acrylic, and let's see, let's go with a nice black, just a little bit. And if you were in the previous panel, I've solved my lid problem on the black, so yay me. Add a little gray, and even just a little bit of this tan. And again, what we're going for is kind of that dirty color that I did as a wash in the prior panel. But as we mix those, and there's about equal parts of those at this point, as I mix it up, it's going to become very black and kind of gray, and I may not be very happy with that, and so I may throw in a little more of the tan to kind of lighten things up. And it really just comes down to whatever color you think the dirt you're trying to apply should be. So it's very much a visual sort of thing. I do it by feel, and there's really no wrong recipe. There's no wrong answer to it. It's whatever speaks to you and what you like to see on something. I tend to like to go for, we've already lightened it up quite a bit there by adding some more of that tan. And so that kind of ends up with a, kind of a medium dirt color, honestly. And so we have our paint to work with, and then what we'll do is, again, just the same kind of dry brush technique we used on the hard parts. We'll just use it on the soft parts judiciously in various places to kind of enhance the look of things. And so I'll give myself some rinse water here, just to make sure we're all working. A little more than that. And I'll be honest with you, in my shop I would not have a squeeze bottle. I would just, run into the house and fill a cup with water. So, nothing fancy about that. So again, we'll take a little paint on the brush. We'll kind of get most of it off on the paper towel. In this case, what I'm going to do is take these seams along the hat here, and I'll just kind of work over them a little bit. And this is a technique I used when I weathered my Blue Squadron pilot suit, which is a petroleum blue nylon is how it starts off life. And it has a nice orange stitching to it, a very bright orange stitching, which is completely incongruous to the weathered look that you see in the film. And so one of the first things to do is kind of knock down the shininess of that orange and just kind of simulate the accumulation of dirt in the seams along a flight suit that is used and maybe not laundered as often as it maybe quite possibly should be. So, but again, as you kind of work your way around the various seams, again, making sure to kind of knock really most of the paint off the brush. It seems wasteful, but this particular paint is like 98 cents a bottle, and I don't think I've used a whole bottle before it dried up on me anyway. So, it's not like you're out a lot of cash for leaving a lot of the paint on the paper towel. So, and after you get to a certain point in this process, you're going to have a puddle of the paint on your paper towel that you can just kind of go back into to refresh your brush as you go. And then you can also do the same thing along the edges where you've just frayed the, and again, this is that same kind of technique that we used with the hard parts on the corners. Just kind of feather it over little dirt along the edges. And again, that gives you a little griminess, a little on the edge of the hat itself, or the item you're dealing with. And so in this case, maybe the cuffs of your flight suit, or the seam for where the zipper or the fastener closes the flight suit for you. Anything gets handled quite a lot. You might think about applying this kind of weathering to kind of illustrate that that gets dirtier than other parts. One thing I've also done, and it's a different kind of wash, so we'll go ahead and kind of mix that up, is we'll start again with a little water. And because we're not going to use the wood glue, we'll go ahead and start with a different wash. Again, there's about maybe an ounce of water in there, something like that, maybe half an ounce. And just a little of the tan paint, not a lot, because what we're going to try and do here, assuming we can really get to it, I would recommend that if you're going to do this sort of thing, and it's not something you've done before, and not something you're super familiar with how it ends up looking, try and find a piece of scrap that matches what you're working with, and go from there. Try it out a little bit, see if you like the way it looks on the similar fabric before you try applying it to your workpiece. That'll just make you happier with life in general, and with the end product. So in this case, I'll take, again, this tan wash, and I'll actually apply it along this kind of the bottom edge here, and kind of almost in kind of a sweat stain pattern. And it's very subtle at this point, as I do a couple more coats as I go along, and I want to avoid the patch, because the fabric behind the patch is actually going to protect the patch a little bit. So I don't want to necessarily sweat through to the patch, but I do want to make things kind of heavy along the front brow, because I know the way I sweat is right through the front corner of that hat, for sure. And then as you go around, so that's going to be a technique you would use at things like armpits or down the center of the back, or any place where you're going to sweat and be a little stinky, and that sort of thing, to kind of just, without you having to actually sweat through your flight suit a couple dozen times, to give the look of a used suit, or a used item. And so in this case, I might have wanted to go a little more aggressive on the paint, because it's kind of soaking in now. But if I did a couple of applications of this, actually, you know what? Let's go a little heavier on the paint. Why not? We're all friends here. We're all right in front of the world. So there we go, and we'll stir that around. Little thicker wash. Again, we're definitely still below skim milk in terms of consistency here, because we want something that flows pretty well. And there we go. That's giving a little more pigment to the thing. And again, you're gonna try and go with maybe more of a kind of an arc along things, and kind of smooth it so it kind of looks organic, like it's a sweat stain that is spread rather than and then kind of dried up little bits of salt and all that, as you go. So there we are. And so again, you end up with that kind of that slight discoloration that says, I've used this hat a lot. And then the work along the brim again kind of indicates that I've used my hands a couple times to take it on and off my head. If there's one particular grip you use, and this is a technique I've used on helmets, but it would work for hats, or like there's a particular part of the flight suit you would touch a lot, like say the top collar or something. You could again take this dirty wash, or this dirty mixture here, and kind of create kind of a fingerprint effect. So if I kind of put my hand here like I'm grabbing my hat, I might say, well, I want a fingerprint kind of here, and just kind of darken that up, and maybe right here for the longer finger, and then maybe right here. And then as I go through and successively apply that weathering, or that detail to it, I end up with something that again looks like I do the same motion to this day in, day out. I'm taking this hat on and off my head, I'm taking it off, I'm adjusting my hair, I'm putting it back. And so if you paid attention, for example, to how you did those things, then you can kind of add those little fingerprints that as you go along in the day, your hands aren't quite clean, so you've taken your hat off and on and off your head. So So there's that, and very similar to that, for example, the Blue Squadron, oh, we'll get that in a minute. Blue Squadron glove. This is not a Blue Squadron glove. This is not the basis for a Blue Squadron glove. This will never be a Blue Squadron glove, except that it is a canvas glove that is mostly white. And so the way the Blue Squadron gloves tend to start life as white, and then they become gray because they've been used so many times. And we won't do the wash to make these gray because it would never dry in time to do another technique. But I did want to kind of illustrate weathering gloves that should look like they're used. And again, we're going back to our old standby, this kind of dirty gray-brown, mostly gray kind of thing. Again, we're going to use the dry brush technique, and we're just going to kind of get to areas where we believe we would be holding things or grabbing things or getting dirty things off. So kind of here along the center of the palm, you would tend to see fairly heavy amount of grease and dirt and things like that accumulating. Yeah, and so you would, and you can be a little less fastidious about removing all the paint from or most of the paint from your brush before you start, because you're wanting to deposit a fair bit of the paint onto the fabric. And so again, as you work it in, as you work it through, you're just basically creating those stains, and as you work in a kind of a random circular-ish pattern as you go by, you're kind of covering up the previous brush marks, and you're creating that kind of look of, hey, that's along the palm of the, maybe not along the curve of the, because again, the part where the tool is going to hit is going to be right about there. Fingerprints the same way. If you tend to pick up greasy parts, you'll want the fingertips to kind of show some dirt and some wear. And if you think about maybe the things you use, and that's something I didn't touch on in the hard part weathering yesterday, but one of the things that thank you. One of the things that to consider is, like, when you look at something that's been used, or like switches that are touched, like if you're, say, trying to weather, say, a pilot chest box, and you got those buttons, you don't necessarily want to weather the whole button. You want there to be a little divot in the button that's clean, because that's where the fingers keep touching it. Look at your keyboard sometime, and look at where the dirt accrues on the edges of your keys, but the center of your keys are nice and shiny and plastic. You've probably worn off the letters, but it's nice and shiny. And so that's the same sort of thing you want to do to apply the realism to the sort of buttons that you're going to use on a costume. Is, again, if it's a button that's used frequently, the dirt is going to accumulate in the places you're not touching, and the parts that you are touching are going to tend to stay clean. It's like the bronze nose of a statue. Everybody touches the nose for luck. The nose is really bright and shiny because everyone keeps rubbing the patina off of it. And then the entire rest of the statue has that nice, kind of brass or bronze patina to it. And so yeah, so as you kind of, again, work the process, and it does take a few applications. We're not going to, belabor the point too much because we are probably running close on time. No, it's only 3:30. Good, we've got some time. So I'll just sit here and bore you with more of this schmutz wash here, because I'm having fun. I don't know about you guys. Are there any questions while I'm just kind of wasting your time painting a glove up here? Sir.
How should you do seams? Should you do more dirty at the seam and then fade?
So on a seam, and I'll kind of use the seams on this glove as something of an example. When I did the seams on the flight suits I've weathered, what I'll do is I'll take, again, the dry brush, and I'll kind of work along the seam. And so what it'll end up with is a darker line kind of right at the seam. I don't know if you can see that very effectively. If not, I'll try to darken it up just a little bit. But you end up with, kind of, as it comes away from the seam, it gets a little, and that's just more to kind of simulate the idea that even if you did launder the item, there's just going to be those areas where the detergent, the water doesn't get to, or the cleaning doesn't get to. And so, let's see if you can see that very effectively. If not, maybe in the clear here, it kind of deepens the deepens the character of the seam. So I would go, kind of heavier right at the seam, right where the seam line is, and then as it comes out, kind of fade it out back into the kind of the natural of the fabric. But that's how that goes. And so another couple of strokes here, and then we'll go check in on our bandolier. But again, as I said, as you kind of apply this, and this can take a little while to get where you're really kind of happy with it. And as we talked about earlier in the Jawa session, there's certain adages like when you're talking about sewing, you can always cut more off. It's not as easy to put stuff back on. In the case of weathering and paint, you can put more on, but it's harder to take it off, especially when you've applied it to cloth. On a hard piece, if you're using acrylic paints and you catch your mistake, happy accident, whatever you want to call it, Bob Ross, in time, you can take a wet cloth and kind of erase that and start over again once you've dried it back up. In the case of fabric, what you're applying is pretty much there. It's going to be, and if you're using fabric paint, even more so. Regular acrylic paint will come out eventually with enough washing, but I have a couple of racers that I've used at armor parties that still have paint on them from similar sorts of things doing. So always err on the side of doing it lighter and just applying more later if you're unhappy with how deep it is. And in fact, I had that problem in the process of having my Blue Squadron pilot gloves approved. I got to where I thought was a nice level of dirt, and I submitted them, and they said, "Oh no, those aren't nearly dirty enough. I mean, it should be almost black with dirt in places." And so it's like, okay, off we go. And so I'm back at it. And so now I end up with I look at the gloves now and say, oh yeah, those look about right. So the feedback from the judges and from the people who are kind of knowledgeable about that sort of thing really does help improve the costume, at least in my experience. And so, but again, it's always better to not do irreversible things if you can avoid it. So, all right, so that's kind of the start of this particular glove. If I were going to use this glove in any sort of costume application, I'm trying to get it to where that shine isn't quite as bad. I would work that a lot more. I'd probably spend easily half an hour or 45 minutes just on that part of it, trying to get that where I was happy with it, and I wouldn't be trying to hold a conversation at the same time. That'd just be what I was doing, And so, but in the case of our tutorial format here, hopefully I gave you enough of an idea of how you'd approach it that you can kind of go mess with it yourself. And again, paint's relatively cheap, and I think I bought a dozen of these for $5, maybe something like that. So if you have something that is a similar fabric to what you want to weather, and you want to try the techniques out on something that isn't very expensive, then you don't run the risk of ruining your workpiece and then having to buy another set of expensive gloves from whoever your vendor is, who's got the nice leather cuff and hits you right there and all that sort of thing. So again, as much as possible, especially until you get familiar with how things work and how they're going to work for you, go with conservative techniques and testing things out on things you don't care about as much. So, all right. So I think we've given the bandolier enough time to kind of do its thing. Oh, there's water, and now there's water on the floor. Luckily, it's just water, so this is not nearly as bad as the paint spill we had earlier in the weekend. So this is really becoming a theme for me, however, and I'm not really all that excited about it. So, all right, so we'll start again with a fresh paper towel. And what we're really going to do with this bandolier is sorry, question. So with a darker thing, what I would do is use a lighter wash or a lighter paint. So again, because dark dirt isn't going to show up as well on a dark surface. So the things you're going to see are going to be the lighter dirt, especially these sandy sorts of things. So I would go with something in a slightly lighter gray, perhaps, if I'm wanting to show that. But it's also going to be more a subtle effect because again, just the nature of dirt is that darker clothes don't tend to show it unless you got just big clumps of it. You know, it's a little easier to kind of disguise, and so it's going to be a more subtle effect. So if you raise the level of gray or add a little white or add a little tan to it to kind of bring it up a shade or two, and then go from there. Again, yeah, and you could start with, you know, something darker, and if you're not happy with it, lighten it up as you go until you do get happy with it. So that's where I would go with it. Any other questions? Sir, sorry, I didn't mean to ignore you before. I just got involved in the other question.
Without denting it, how would you weather, for example, a button made out of PLA?
Which item made out of PLA?
PLA.
What are we making out of PLA? Sorry.
Button.
A button? On a Mandalorian gauntlet. And so you're wanting to weather it without denting it.
Yeah.
Okay, so what kind of weathering are you wanting to try to apply to it? Just have it look old?
Yeah.
So one thing you could do is you could actually put the entire glove into a box with some small like nuts or screws or parts. Just kind of shake it up a little bit. And what that'll do is it won't really dent it very badly, but it will create little imperfections in it. And then you could take some of the techniques we did yesterday with the dry brushing and things like that to kind of bring up those little divots, those little indentations. Use a wash to kind of sit in the crannies and kind of make it look like little scratches on the item. You could also create little scratches using a craft knife if you were very careful and very light with it, or you could use again a fairly coarse grit sandpaper just lightly over the item. And now, the thing with PLA is you've already done a lot of work to make it very, very smooth and get rid of all of the striations from the print lines. So it seems like a shame to go in and add a bunch of extra imperfections. But you know, I understand, you know, that's you know, going to give you the more. So to some degree, sometimes there's that I don't really want to mess up this piece, but what you really got to do is, you know, kind of it's going to look better weathered. It's going to be a better product if I give it a little character, if I give it a little honestly beneficial neglect, as it were. So that's where I would kind of start with that. We can, you know, it's again, I would take a piece of PLA that you don't really care about, a print you didn't, and just try things out and see if you like the way they look on that, and then try to apply the same technique to the costume part. You know, again, it's more just, for me, it's about trial and error. It's about figuring out things that go, and at best, what I'm hoping to do is give you some things you can add to your toolkit for trying things out, and learning by experience. And because, you know, nobody knew anything when they were born, and everyone's learned everything they know, one way or the other. Someone's taught them, they've figured it out. Hopefully I can give you some information to start with, and then you can go off into your own experimentation and see what works best for your costuming. So, any other questions real quick? Did we have one over here? Okay, so as far as the bandolier goes, we've covered it in sand, and we'll shake it off, and you see there's still quite a bit adhering to it. So this particular Jawa has been caught in a sandstorm, apparently after eating honey. But what we're going to do is we're going to take our paper towel, and we're just going to lightly kind of brush off a lot of the surface sand as we go. And so, you know, the places where the bandolier is kind of tucked under itself, we're going to go ahead and, we're not going to hit those super hard just yet. We're just going to kind of brush those things as we go, and with a surface kind of thing. And so let me do this. Let me stand up and I'll work backwards, as it were, to kind of show kind of the motion I'm using on the brushing. Again, getting into the big valleys and the big crannies, but I'm not really working them super hard. I'm not trying to clean the bandolier very effectively. And so as we go, we got, you know, and this is again going to be another of those personal preference things. If you want to kind of have it look like, you know, this particular Jawa has never in life ever shaken out his bandolier, you may leave a little more of the sand hanging around. If you want to represent yourself as a Jawa or a bandolier wearer who is very fastidious about his bandolier, you can certainly take off almost all of the sand, but in the end, what you kind of end up with, and I'll even, you know, kind of just on those major parts of the straps there, just kind of get a little corner of the paper towel through there. And again, so what you end up with is definitely more weathered than it started. And so, and this will then, as the, this will not fit me, so I'm going to try and put it on myself. But, as the glue really dries and sets, that sand will stick there. And if you lose a little, well, that's just the way life goes. If you find that you've lost enough, you could do the same treatment over again. But you'll also notice that, especially in these areas right here, what used to be a much darker brown has kind of lightened up a little bit due to the paint still remaining there. And so it looks more like old leather, which tends to fade as the stain and the dye ages over the years. And so you end up with a much older looking bandolier than we started with today. So, yes, sir.
Would you apply the same principle to Chelsea boots?
You could. Again, especially if you were looking to kind of work around the where the sole and the upper meat, that would be a great place to do this sort of technique. Especially in Chelsea boots, that little U with the elastic, right in that curve area there would be a great place for this sort of thing. Especially if you're looking to do like a sandy, I'm guessing, probably. Short trooper. Okay, same deal, just different colored Chelsea boot. So yeah. But yeah, that would be the same sort of thing you could do there. And again, especially a short trooper who's working on the beach. Tough duty, isn't it? So yeah, so you certainly use that sort of technique. And if you had, you wouldn't even have to use sand. Although sand is the one I use most because I tend to do characters from Tatooine a lot. But yeah, so that would certainly be a technique that would be applicable there. If you had any other sort of granular sort of thing you wanted to do that with, you could do it with finer dirt if you wanted to. You could try and, I would think you could try and maybe dye talcum powder and do the same sort of thing. I have not tried that, so I'm not saying that it works, but maybe if one of you figures it out, you could tell me if it does. Anyway, so I'm just trying to put ideas in your head. So yeah, that's one way to go with that. And like I said, this is just the magic on this is the wood glue, which provides the adhesive, and the paint, which provides the dulling, and then the sand itself, which does all the heavy lifting and looks great in crannies and nooks and things like that. So, other questions? All right. Is there any part of this you'd like me to hit more heavily? I mean, we are about 20 minutes ahead of time, which is completely unusual for every other of my panels. So I'm not quite sure what to do with myself. We do have a giveaway, so we can certainly work with that. Sir, yes?
With the gloves, where do you find gloves like those online?
So these particular gloves are a gauntlet-style gardening glove, I believe. I found these on Amazon. Like I said, I got a pack of a dozen of them for like $5 or something like that. It was not expensive at all, and I will make it a point to put that item in the particular in the QR code. Just kind of say, yep, this is the glove I use to try and weather, and I'll actually put a link to the bandolier, which you can find on Amazon as well. The hat, you're going to have to go to the particular vendor I bought the hat from, but I'm assuming you're going to be weathering a flight suit, not a hat, but still. So yeah, so I can tell you where to find the hat right today, and I'd be happy to sell you one, I'm sure. Right. Well, in this case, like I said before, I didn't find out until Thursday night that I was for sure doing this panel, and so otherwise I would have brought a pair of coveralls or something that looks more like a flight suit or something more like you would work with, simply to have something a little more like the item. And so, oh, well, there you go. See, if only I had known you, 15 minutes before this panel. So yeah, but like I said, I'll make it a point to, like I said, everything that I ended up using in all of these, I'll shoot a link to, just in case it's something you're interested in trying to do something. Now, obviously, I don't know any costumes that this would directly work with. You could do it for a Tuscan, actually, because the Tuscan glove is actually a gardening style glove. Now, you will have done arm wraps for the Tuscan, so having this gauntlet kind of cuff to it doesn't really help you much, but it doesn't really hurt you much either. So yeah, it could certainly work in that regard. It would not be something that I think would be very easily applicable to like a pilot, because I don't think A, the gauntlet is long enough, and B, it's not leather. So, you know, but you could say, for example, go to Harbor Freight and pick up welding sleeves or whatever that are, and you know, attach them to the glove. However if you have the sewing skill for that, I've seen that hack done as well. But and of course, then there's this nice conspicuous red line around here that probably wouldn't match any sort of costume standard you've seen. So, but yeah, so these were mostly just because they were canvas gloves and they had a nice texture to them and would take the paint pretty well. So, question, sir? Yes. So a little from column B. I don't tend to wash them as much, but also we've used acrylic paints here because that's what I happen to have a bunch of. For specifically costume fabric weathering, I would use actually fabric paint, which is designed to stick to fabric and not wash out as easily. And so I would do the same sort of colors. So I'd use my blacks, my tans, my whites, and create the level of color I want. And then I would apply that. And that is in fact what I used when I weathered my pilot costume. Was I actually used fabric paint versions of these colors and did that. And that has actually held up pretty well. Now I have maybe fully laundered the pilot suit once, and so it did stick around, but most of the time I'll do the isopropyl alcohol trick, or the getting it good and aired out and killing the bacteria sort of thing so it doesn't stink, and being nylon, it takes to that pretty easily, and so it doesn't really provide a lot of places for things to grow as much as say canvas might or things like that. So it's it's one of those things that. And I think if you were in the Q&A we did with all the clubs, with the Mandalorian sitting about here, he was talking about his weathering on his soft parts of his Mandalorian outfit, and had talked about using paint, and he specifically talked about using acrylics to do the weathering on that. I think he said that he was never doing that again. Maybe he was definitely never doing something again, but also that the hole punching on the leatherwork, yeah, but he also mentioned that he doesn't want to launder that particular part, specifically because he doesn't want the weathering to come out. I believe he was particularly proud of the weathering, and therefore didn't want it to get messed up by actual laundering. Now I feel like if you were very careful about it and used either a hand wash sort of thing and hand dry, you could reduce that, but you probably end up in a situation where you're still going to have to reapply weathering after the fact, just after a laundering thing. Yes, sir. So the glue I tend to use, so I don't. The thing is, I don't have a lot of armor-heavy costumes at the moment, so I haven't done like a stormtrooper or a biker scout or a TIE pilot. The most armor-heavy I have is my X-Wing pilot helmet, and for that, because I know that the manufacturer recommends ABS glue, that's what I used. And so it's a Darth Hare helmet kit, and so I end up using ABS glue, which does actually melt the outer layer of the plastic, and so it fuses together, and it forms a very strong bond. It is very difficult to remove that without breaking the piece after that point because of that bond, but it also is a fairly durable thing. I would not. I've been told that I shouldn't consider that for a stormtrooper, simply because it does make it harder to reposition things if you need to later on down the road. I have been recommended, and I will take their word as good, that E6000 is a good solution for that. It will hold very well. And if you need to remove it for some reason, you can put the part in the freezer, and apparently it will pop right apart after you take it out of the freezer, having done that. So
It may still take some work, but it is.
may still take some work, but it definitely is a lot easier to take apart than if you don't freeze it first. So, like I said, I'm willing to take that as gospel, because people I trust very implicitly have told me that's the way the world should work. So. Would who?
Barge, it's kind of like a rubber cement whenever it finally.
I don't have any specific experience with that, so I can't really recommend or disrecommend it. I would say that again, you know, as I talked about before, doing a test fit and then, you know, trying to break it apart, you know, and subject it to the sort of stresses that are going to pop apart a piece of armor and see if it does. You know, that'd be the only way I'd know how to find out.
I've used it for like other projects where it bonds well enough, but because it's partially rubber, it has a flex.
A little give to it, okay.
aspect to it before it gave you.
And I think E6000 has that same quality.
I've used barge for building scout boots, and that has worked. But if you're doing like hard ADS armor, E6000 is the way to go unless you want that permanent protection, the ADS.
Right.
You know, E6000 comes in both clear and white, so make sure you.
And black.
And black.
Oh, and
I
black.
got it.
Okay.
Yeah, and in fact,
I haven't seen that.
so fun fact, back to the hard part weathering we did yesterday, if you have a part that you want to look particularly oily and particularly dirty, like it's leaking oil maybe a little bit, you can take a little black E6000 around the seam, let it dribble just a little bit, and when it dries, it'll still dry glossy, so it'll look like fresh oil kind of accumulating around that. And if you wanted to make it look like old oil, you could add a little, you know, schmutz wash to it to kind of darken it up just slightly, make it look like dirty oil. So yeah, I mean, I've done that in the past, actually on my chest box for my pilot. I just the tiniest little bit around the hose where it connects to the chest box to give it kind of that little extra character. So, yeah. All right, other questions? Yeah.
Does the 6000 work well on PLA?
I believe it should, yes. Yeah. It works well on a lot of things, especially plastics, as I'm given to understand. I've used E6000 a lot. If I'm putting together smaller things, I'll use 2-part epoxy a lot of times because it'll grab and cure quickly, especially the JB Quick that I use. But I wouldn't necessarily use it to put together armor. I'm usually putting together smaller parts, things like a Gonktoroid or things like, you know, a Jawa face or something like that. And so the conventional wisdom is E6000 is king as far as armor.
It does have a 24-hour cure time, which if you're in a hurry or you have something breaking in an event, that makes it an issue. But being able to reposition something help when you're initially building a costume is a game changer.
Right. So I will say that I've heard of the technique of using the E6000 as your main bond, and then using some super glue as almost like a clamp. To you clamp it in place with the super glue, let the super glue dry quickly, and then that gives the E6000 time to cure in place and give you the much stronger bond. Because super glue will tend to pop apart. You know, I mean that's but with the E6000. That's going to give you that seam you're looking for, I believe. So with that, any last question? If not, we'll get to the giveaway while I kind of tidy up a little bit in preparation for Phil's fiberglass family. So.